Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, May 10th, 2023. The Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas presenting tighter rules for when migrants crossing the U.S Mexico border may claim asylum. It's part of the Biden administration's plan to handle the wave of migrants anticipated starting Thursday when Title 42, the tool that's been used to turn them back due to COVID-19 pandemic grounds, expires. Republican Congressman George Santos of New York pleading not guilty to 13 federal charges, including fraud, money laundering, and theft of public funds, also making false statements. He's accused of stealing COVID-19 unemployment insurance benefits and raising money supposedly for his election campaign, but keeping it for himself. We'll hear from Congressman Santos, plus House Republican and Democratic leaders, and talk with Politico's legal reporter Erica Orden. Republican Congressman James Comer giving an update on the Oversight Committee's investigation into what he says is President Joe Biden's family's members' corrupt economic business dealings in foreign countries, including China. President Joe Biden traveling to New York State in a district he won in 2020 but is now represented by a Republican in Congress to talk about the negotiations over how to raise the national debt ceiling to prevent a default, as House Republicans still want spending cuts to go along with that increase. And bipartisan Senate bills introduced to make sure classified material is not mistakenly leaving the White House. And the Senate confirms a new archivist of the United States to lead the National Archives. From the Associated Press, President Joe Biden's administration on Thursday will begin denying asylum to migrants who show up at the U.S. Mexico border without first applying online or seeking protection in a country they pass through, according to a new rule released Wednesday. Part of new measures meant to crack down on illegal border crossings while creating new legal pathways, including a plan to open 100 regional migration hubs across the Western Hemisphere. It's almost certain to face legal challenges. In 2019, then-President Donald Trump pursued similar but stricter measures, but a federal appeals court prevented them from taking effect. That from Associated Press. The Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas talking about this new rule at a news conference held at Customs and Border Protection headquarters in Washington, D.C., part of the steps being taken to deal with the expected rush of migrants on the U.S. Mexico border when Title 42 expires on Thursday.
Today, we are beginning a new digital advertising campaign in Central and South America to counter the lies of the smugglers with accurate information about U.S. immigration laws. This campaign adds to our extensive ongoing communications efforts in the region. As you can see by the images before us of removal flights and encounters with our Border Patrol agents, we are making it very clear that our border is not open, that crossing irregularly is against the law, and that those who are not eligible for relief will be quickly returned. Do not listen to the lies of the smugglers. This is what will happen to you. You will be returned. Today, alongside the Department of Justice, we are finalizing a new rule to encourage individuals to use available, lawful, safe, and orderly pathways to enter the United States. The rule presumes that those who do not use lawful pathways to enter the United States are ineligible for asylum. It allows the United States, it allows us to remove individuals who do not establish a reasonable fear of persecution in the country of removal. Non-citizens can rebut this presumption only in very limited circumstances. For example, if they have used our lawful pathways or sought asylum or protection in another country through which they have traveled and were denied. This rule goes into effect once the Title 42 public health order terminates tomorrow, on Thursday at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time.
Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas at a news conference today at Customs and Border Protection headquarters in Washington, D.C. He also said that officials are surging personnel to the southern border, including more than 1,400 from the Homeland Security Department, 1,000 processing coordinators, and an additional 1,500 employees from the Defense Department. And he said with the expiration of Title 42, immigration enforcement against those who cross the border unlawfully are subject to criminal penalties under Title VIII. That includes deportation and a 5-year ban on re-entering the United States. And Secretary Mayorkas, in his remarks today, blaming Congress for the current situation, saying the legislature has failed to fix a broken immigration system. Well, up on Capitol Hill, the U.S. House taking up an immigration bill. CNN reports mid-afternoon that House GOP leaders were scrambling to quell an internal rebellion over their border security bill, according to multiple GOP sources, putting the timing of the legislation's passage in limbo. The House was supposed to vote Wednesday afternoon on a rule to set floor debate for the bill, but leadership recessed the floor as they worked to find a path forward. Final passage scheduled for Thursday when Title 42 expires. CNN article has this as well. One major hang-up, language that asked the Secretary of Homeland Security to issue a report determining whether Mexican cartels are a foreign terrorist organization. Some Republicans are pushing leadership to take it out of the bill, concerned it could create a new credible fear claim for asylum seekers. And there are also still lingering concerns over a provision in the bill to expand E-Verify, a database employers use to verify immigration status. Republicans representing districts with agriculture were worried that without reworking the agricultural visa program, the provision could make it more difficult for rural farmers to find a pipeline of workers. That reporting from CNN early afternoon. Well, late afternoon, the House did come back and started work on the rules for debate. Meanwhile, off the floor, there were a lot of news conferences talking about the underlying House Republican Immigration and Border Security bill. First, the Republican House members.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Congresswoman Monica De La Cruz, and my district lies in the southernmost tip of Texas, including McAllen, Texas, which will very quickly become ground zero for the illegal immigration that will really surge and come to a surge after Title 42 is lifted. I want you all to understand that this district has one of the most Hispanic counties in the entire nation. We are concerned. I'm a mother of 2 children. I live in the district, and I'm concerned about the amount of fentanyl that's coming through. I'm concerned about the inhumane treatment by the Biden administration and his failed border policies on the immigrants that have been coming through. Between April 16th and April 30th, we had 30,000 illegal immigrants cross through the RGV sector. 30,000, 20,000 of those assigned to Brownsville, Texas. My sources in the Mexico area tell me that between Matamoros and Reynosa, we have 50,000 illegal immigrants waiting to cross our border the moment Title 42 is lifted. The Biden administration has failed the American people. He has failed our Border Patrol agents. He has failed our border communities, and he has failed America with his open border policy. But the GOP here will pass this week H.R. 2, which will put order on the border and finally secure our borders and bring our immigrants in a humane manner. Thank you.
Congresswoman Monica De La Cruz, Republican from Texas, at a news conference today with other House Republicans. A CQ roll call summary of that House Republican border security immigration bill says it would resume construction of the wall on the U.S. Mexico border started by former President Trump, require the hiring of thousands more Border Patrol agents, require Homeland Security Department to reopen Trump-era migrant detention facilities, and either detain migrants seeking asylum or deport them to Mexico or another country for the duration of their claims process, while severely restricting the ability of migrants to claim asylum by narrowing eligibility criteria, modifying existing parole authority, prevent the granting of parole into the U.S. for categorical groups of migrants, and creating a new online employment eligibility verification system similar to E-Verify, and mandating that all U.S. employers use it to verify the work eligibility of potential employees. That from CQ Roll Call. Some House Democrats also holding a news conference talking about immigration and border security. Linda Sanchez of California talked about opposing the Republican bill and supporting her own bill.
We are here today because the border bill that Republicans are pushing not only outright denies these stories, but it embraces the same failed xenophobic immigration policies that we've seen from Republicans time and time again. It neglects the people behind immigration policy. from my parents to dreamers to the children who flee unspeakable violence today. There's no doubt that our immigration system is broken, and there's no doubt that we need solutions for the problems that we face at our border. But the solution is not H.R. 2, also known as the Child Deportation Act. This bill is a resurgence of failed MAGA border policies that promise harsh enforcement and nothing more. And if we've learned anything from the last 3 decades, it's that enforcement-only solutions will not solve the problem. This bill would eliminate our parole system and make it impossible for those fleeing violence or natural disasters to cross our borders between ports of entry and seek asylum. It would require organizations like the Red Cross and Catholic Charities to verify every individual's immigration status before providing critical life-saving services at our border. It would destroy our American businesses and upend our nation's food system by imposing nationwide e-verify. It would deport folks, like dreamers, who've been in the U.S. for their lifetime, if they do not maintain their status. It would allow unaccompanied children to be detained for a month or more, and it would limit their access to counsel and send them back into the hands of smugglers and those who seek to exploit them. And it would put taxpayers on the hook for billions of dollars to complete Trump's border wall. This is not what the American people want. But across the board, here are a few things that Americans do support. They support smart, safe, and modern border security. They support dreamers, family unity over family separation and deportation, a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million people who live and work here and contribute to our economy every day. They support engaging countries abroad to address the root causes of immigration, and an immigration system that is orderly but also humane. That is what the U.S. Citizenship Act is all about.
Congresswoman Linda Sanchez, Democrat from California, at a news conference with other House Democrats. President Biden has issued a veto threat against the House Republican Immigration and Border Security bill. And a reminder, you can always follow the House floor debate on that bill and other legislation on C-SPAN television, on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app, and streamed at cspan.org. Story from the New York Times, Representative George Santos, the Republican whose pivotal victory in New York was soon followed by revelations that he had falsified his biography on the campaign trail, has been charged by federal prosecutors in a wide-ranging indictment accusing him of wire fraud, money laundering, stealing public funds, and lying in federal disclosure forms. Mr. Santos surrendered to the authorities at federal court on Long Island on Wednesday, after which the indictment was unsealed, and then later he appeared before a magistrate judge in the afternoon. Congressman Santos, after the hearing, spoke to reporters outside the courthouse in South Islip, New York.
The reality is it's a witch hunt, because it makes no sense that in 4 months, 5 months, I'm indicted. You have Joe Biden's entire family receiving deposits from nine family members receiving money from foreign destinations into their bank accounts. It's been years of exposing. A lot of you here have reported on them, and yet no investigation is launched into them. I'm going to fight. I'm getting back to that. I'm going to fight my battle. I'm going to deliver. I'm going to fight the witch hunt. I'm going to take care of clearing my name, and I look forward to doing that.
Congressman George Santos, Republican from New York, outside the courthouse on Long Island today. Back in Washington, D.C., reaction to the indictment from the House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, Republican from Louisiana, and the conference chair, Elise Stefanik, Republican from New York.
Another bill you guys have up on the floor this week is about extending the statute of limitations on pandemic unemployment benefit fraud. George Santos has been indicted. One of his indictments is for unemployment benefit fraud. Does that undermine the message you're trying to send with that bill? And then also, given all those indictments of Mr. Santos, the question for you and Chairwoman Stefanik is, should he resign?
So first of all, in regard to George Santos, he was already removed from all of his committees. There is a legal process. The charges just came out. We just saw some of them this morning. And so in America, there's a presumption of innocence, but they're serious charges. He's going to have to go through the legal process. But we're going to continue to work to root out fraud. And there's lots of it. And we're talking about tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars in fraud in many federal programs. We've pointed this out. I mean, they're not even checking Social Security numbers. So you've got reports of people even in foreign countries getting taxpayer money for things that should be only available to Americans who are coming on hard times, not to go to drug cartels or to people that just want to bilk the system. And so I hope Democrats will support us in rooting out fraud. They haven't shown an interest in it so far, but we're going to bring legislation to continue.
Does it undermine the message that you're trying to send with this bill, though, with this indictment of one of your...
Obviously, he's going to have to face the charges that he has. Again, he's got a presumption of innocence, but that court process is going to play itself out. But he's already been removed from all of his committees. And I don't know if anybody else has.
Sure, I just want to add to that. As I've said from the very beginning on questions on this subject, this legal process is going to play itself out. Unfortunately, this is not the first time a member of Congress from either party has been indicted. There are a set of rules, and as the majority leader stated, he voluntarily had stepped down from his committees. We are committed to making sure that we root out any fraud when it comes to unemployment pandemic assistance, and we're working to have support from our conference, and it's good policy, and we urge the Democrats to vote in support of it.
Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, Republican from New York, the conference chair, and Congressman Steve Scalise, Republican from Louisiana, the majority leader of the House, at a House Republican leadership news conference today. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy also standing by Congressman George Santos. CNN reports that Congressman McCarthy is not calling on George Santos to resign. After being informed of the money laundering and wire fraud charges, Speaker McCarthy told CNN that it always concerns me. He will go through his time in trial, and let's find out how the outcome is. Congressman Tony Gonzalez, Republican from Texas, tweeting, though, the people of New York's 3rd District deserve a voice in Congress. George Santos should be immediately expelled from Congress and a special election initiated at the soonest possible date. Some House Republican leaders holding their own news conference. Here's the caucus chair, Pete Aguilar of California, asked about Congressman Santos.
On George Santos, I mean, obviously the charges were just unsealed this morning. More Republicans appear to be calling on him to resign. Has there been any further talk of potentially putting forth some type of privileged resolution to expel the congressman?
I know that there have been items that have been offered by legislators on our side in the past. We're going to wait to see how this plays out. There is one person who can make this change, Speaker McCarthy. And I think that's going to be the interesting point here. George Santos was the deciding vote on the Default on America Act. And he loved the drama behind it. He loved walking down the middle of the aisle, holding his card up, and being vote number 217 to deliver that piece of legislation that would cut veterans and cut so many important programs. That is the Kevin McCarthy coalition. George Santos speaks to the Kevin McCarthy coalition. So I don't know what Speaker McCarthy is going to do or what House Republicans are going to do. We're digesting the charging documents, but the level of fraud, the level of extremism, the continued lies throughout all of this, these are things that we've known, but clearly the DOJ has been working on this now. It's just an unfortunate thing that we're all colleagues together, and this level of fraud that's been perpetrated on the people of New York. But this is at the hands of Kevin McCarthy. But we're going to keep our options open and see where we go from here.
Congressman Pete Aguilar, Democrat from California, the caucus chair, at a news conference. Politico legal reporter Erica Orden has been following the arrest of Congressman George Santos, joining us now on the phone. Thank you. What are the specific charges against the congressman?
So the specific charges he's facing, it was a 13-count indictment. He's facing charges of wire fraud, money laundering, theft of public funds, and false statements to Congress.
He made it
kind of an array of different charges.
He made his first court appearance today. How did that go?
He did. He pleaded not guilty to the charges. He was released on a $500,000 bond, and he has, they set a next court date for him, which will be, I believe it's June 30th. So we'll see him back in court then.
The headline today that the congressman was arrested may be to some not surprising. This has been building for a while.
It has. There have been months, really, of stories about various sort of scandals attached to him. And so this investigation, appears to have been in the works for some time, and it was not exactly surprising, as you're mentioning, that he was indicted. He said, I believe he told a reporter yesterday that that it was a surprise to him that he hadn't been informed that he was going to be indicted, but it doesn't seem entirely surprising to people who have sort of followed his saga. There are a lot of scandalous sort of activities that have been reported on with regard to him that were not charged in this indictment. So I think, I guess there could be a question about, like, can those things still be charged? Like, could he still face charges for some of that other stuff that he's been accused of doing? And the answer is yes. I mean, they could always do a superseding indictment, charge him with, there's no indication that they're doing that. That is definitely something that has happened before and that they have the option of doing.
The U.S. House Republican leadership have been emphasizing that Congressman Santos no longer sits on committees. What are the rules in Congress, in the House and in the Republican conference, about what happens when a congressman is indicted?
Well, it sounds like the House members, the GOP members, are sort of largely taking a wait-and-see approach. They seem to be saying, well, we're going to just let the sort of legal process play out and let us take our lead from that. There's a number of people, as we've reported today, who have said that and haven't exactly called for him, to resign or leave Congress. So they seem to be sitting back and really sitting on their hands about it.
We're talking with Erica Orden from Politico. Unfortunately, this is not a unique thing, that members of Congress have been indicted in the past. Some have gone to jail. Is there a pattern, perhaps, to the charges that George Santos would fit into or not fit into?
Well, it's certainly the case that a number of people have been indicted or convicted of campaign finance violations, and there's one alleged scheme that he is accused of that has to do with him soliciting funds from two political donors and then allegedly using them to pay for personal things, pay down personal debt, buy designer clothing, things like that. So that is a fairly common, I guess you could say, charge that members of Congress have faced. But some of the other charges in the indictment are less common, not the sort of things you regularly see against members of Congress, including, he's accused of fraudulently obtaining unemployment benefits. That's not something you typically or often see among elected officials, federal elected officials in Congress. The false statements charge is very common, but that is not sort of like one of the central charges here. In this case, he's accused of essentially lying on his financial disclosures to the House in various ways, in some cases overstating his income and in some cases failing to report certain income.
And a final question, besides the legal problems that he has, what penalties could he face from the House itself? Well,
I guess, it seems like people are, like we were talking about before, it seems like people are really sitting on their hands and waiting to see what happens with the legal process here. Members don't seem inclined to take much action before they know the result of this indictment, and that could take quite a while. He pleaded not guilty, and so it can often take a year for a case to go to trial. So we might be looking at at least a year before we know what sort of consequences he might face.
Erica Orden, a legal reporter with Politico. Find her stories at Politico.com and on Twitter at @eorden. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And a story from ABC News. Ryan Harris, a federal prosecutor speaking on behalf of the government, laid out the conditions of Congressman Santos's bond, which defense counsel had agreed to as, quote, something palatable for both of us. Among the conditions, Congressman Santos can travel within the continental U.S. but must notify pretrial services before doing so. He can travel freely within and between New York City, Long Island, and Washington, D.C. And a spokesperson for the Eastern District of New York confirmed that Congressman Santos will not be required to wear an ankle monitor. This from NBC News. The Republican chairman of the House Oversight Committee on Wednesday mounted more attacks against President Joe Biden and his family, alleging that relatives of the president engaged in business with foreign nationals as part of the panel's investigation into the finances of the Biden family. Chairman James Comer, Republican from Kentucky, sent a memorandum Wednesday morning to Republican members of the panel about what he described as information the committee recently received from subpoenas from 4 different banks. The memo said the subpoenas were tailored to specific individuals and companies that engaged in business activities with Biden family members and their business associates. Congressman Comer also led a news conference today covered by C-SPAN. He said one of the countries the Biden family members did business with was China.
We'll also provide further information regarding the Biden's relationship with China. This includes 2 individuals the committee is particularly concerned about. One of them, Xi Jinping, had close ties to the highest levels of the Chinese Communist Party and operated a multi-billion-dollar energy company with access to large sums of money. We'll discuss how the Bidens received millions of dollars from this individual through the use of shell companies and wire transfers. In March, the committee released its first bank records memorandum that showed a Biden associate, Rob Walker, used his company to funnel money from the Chinese to various Biden family members. Democrats dismissed the evidence, even though it was based on bank records directly from the bank. The Democrats on the Oversight Committee received the same records as the Republicans, and they were able to verify the information. Democrats said all the bank records showed were Papa John's and Starbucks receipts. They deliberately chose to misconstrue and deny what was clearly in front of them. Hunter Biden's representatives claimed the money was, quote, good faith seed funds, but could not explain why those funds had to go through an intermediary in what appears to be an attempt to hide the transfers from the Chinese. They also couldn't explain why the Bidens received over $1 million in 16 different wire transfers over a period of 3 months to at least 5 different banks. The president, when confronted with this information, said it wasn't true. Instead of being honest with the American people, President Biden has claimed since the 2020 election that his family has not received money from China. That was a lie in 2020, and he continues to lie to the American people now.
Congressman James Comer, Republican from Kentucky, chair of the Oversight and Accountability Committee, at a news conference today with other Republican committee members. Back to the NBC News article, White House spokesperson Ian Sams said that Congressman Comer has a history of playing fast and loose with the facts and spreading baseless innuendo while refusing to conduct his so-called investigations with legitimacy. He has hidden information from the public to selectively leak and promote his own hand-picked narratives as part of his overall effort to lob personal attacks at the president and his family. Bipartisan legislation was introduced today in the Senate to reform the security classification system in response to the revelations that former President Trump, current President Biden, and former Vice President Pence all had classified materials at their residences, and also the classified Pentagon documents that were posted by an alleged leaker who is facing charges. The goal, the senators say, is to reduce overclassification, prevent mishandling of classified information, promote better use of intelligence, and enhance public trust. Senator Mark Warner, Democrat from Virginia, chair of the Intelligence Committee, began the news conference.
The first bill we've got will ensure that information may only take on a classification level if there is a balance test that says that the need to classify outweighs the public interest's right to know. Second, the legislation will ensure a maximum 25-year period for classifying documents and only would allow agency heads or the President of the United States to extend classification beyond that period. Third, and this is a little edgy, creates financial incentives that effectively tax agencies based on how many records they classify, and then use those proceeds to actually advance technology solutions for declassification. One of the things that we recognize is there's nobody in charge of classification. Now it's done all across the agency levels, across the IC, DOD, and other entities. So we designate the Director of National Intelligence as the point person to lead a whole-of-government reform of the classification system. Next, we will also require minimum standards for insider threat programs. We've seen the failure of those insider threat programs with the recent incident of Airman Shashera, so that by having insider threat programs in place, it would point out where somebody is overclassifying or walking out the door with classified documents. And finally, and a lot of this effort started when we were looking at the challenges with the Trump, Biden, and Pence documents, finally we will require a security review of presidential and vice presidential records in order to ensure that records being classified are not marked improperly, and that there is a process in place before presidents and vice presidents take those documents as they leave office.
Senator Mark Warner, Democrat from Virginia, chair of the Intelligence Committee, at a news conference today on Capitol Hill, introducing the legislation along with Democratic Senator Ron Wyden and Republican Senators John Cornyn and Jerry Moran. Under one of the bills, Senator Warner discussed National Archives would screen documents leaving the White House for classified material. Today, the Senate confirmed a new archivist. Here's Senator Gary Peters, Democrat from Michigan, chair of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, speaking on the floor before the vote.
I rise in support of Colleen Shogun's nomination to be the Archivist of the United States. The Archivist of the United States leads the National Archives and Records Administration, an important role that is responsible for maintaining and for preserving presidential and federal records. In addition to preserving documents that tell the story of our nation's history, the National Archives also provides access to critical records for the public to use, including providing veterans and service members with the military personal records needed to access the benefits that they have earned through their service. As an accomplished political scientist who has held nonpartisan leadership roles throughout her career, Dr. Shogun is well qualified to lead the National Archives. She would also be the first woman to hold this job. She is currently the Senior Vice President and Director of the David M. Rubenstein Center for the White House History and the White House Historical Association, and previously served as Deputy Director of the Congressional Research Service at the Library of Congress and Vice Chair of the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission. Throughout multiple Congresses and presidential administrations in both parties, Dr. Shogun has demonstrated a strong commitment to serving the American people with nonpartisan integrity. During the nomination process, Dr. Shogun showed a deep understanding of the archive's critical role, and that she is prepared to lead the agency as it tackles challenges such as the Veterans Records backlog and the digitization of records all across the federal government.
Senator Gary Peters, Democrat from Michigan, chair of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, on the Senate floor today before the vote to confirm this nominee. The vote was 52 to 45, and she was confirmed. It was mostly party line, 3 Republicans voting yes, along with the Democrats and independents, Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia, Susan Collins of Maine, and Lisa Murkowski from Alaska. And also in the chamber voting, for the first time in a few months, Senator Dianne Feinstein, Democrat from California. She had been recovering from a severe case of shingles, returning to Washington this week, and in a wheelchair, but in the chamber and voting. And she also put out a statement saying that her doctors have advised her to work a lighter schedule as she continues to deal with complications during her recovery. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Listening to programs on C-SPAN through C-SPAN Radio just got easier. Tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio, and listen to Washington Journal daily at 7 a.m. Eastern, important congressional hearings and other public affairs events throughout the day. And weekdays at 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern, catch Washington Today for a fast-paced report on the stories of the day. Listen to C-SPAN anytime. Just tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. An update on the debt ceiling talks. This from Associated Press. Fresh off a White House meeting with no serious breakthrough on the debt limit standoff, President Joe Biden is launching a new phase of his pressure campaign against House Republicans as he makes his case that lawmakers should lift the nation's borrowing authority without any strings attached. Mr. Biden traveling to Valhalla, New York, to argue that a measure passed by House GOP lawmakers that would lift the debt limit for about a year while curbing some federal spending would impose cuts for veterans care, educators, and other domestic priorities. The president spoke at SUNY Westchester Community College.
There's a very extreme wing of the Republican Party, and the House of Representatives refer to themselves now. I've been calling them this for a while, but now they refer to themselves as the MAGA Republicans. And they've taken control of the House. They've taken control. They have a speaker who has his job because he yielded to the, quote, MAGA element of the party. And they're doing the best, to the best of my knowledge, what no other political party has done in the nation's history. They're literally, not figuratively, holding the economy hostage by threatening to default on our nation's debt that we've already incurred. We've already incurred over the last couple hundred years, unless we give in to their threats and demands as to what they think we should be doing with regard to the budget. This would be incredibly damaging. Here's what the Speaker has put forward for the Republican proposal. He says he's going to take the funding, how we fund government, back to what the levels were in 2022, before the omnibus bill. And they exclude any cuts in defense. They said we're going to go back to spending what we spent in 2022. But we're not going to make any cuts in defense, which we spent in 2023. We're calling for in 2023. You may remember in the State of the Union, I got our Republican colleagues to agree somewhat spontaneously to protect Social Security and Medicare from any cuts. Remember I said, now let me get this straight. You're not going to cut Medicare. You're not going to. They said, that's right. I said, well, you know, you're on camera. They can see you. Well, so far they're not cutting Social Security so far. And not only do they rule out any new revenue, they're still determined to make permanent the $2 trillion tax cuts which due to expire, the Trump tax cuts, without paying a penny of it. Now, here's what that leaves us with. It's just basic sort of math. It leaves us with the requirement to cut 22% of everything else in the budget in order to meet the requirements they're demanding that we live at the 2022 budget numbers. The Speaker and the Republicans don't like that I point that out. But that's not my opinion. It's just basic math.
President Biden today at SUNY Westchester Community College in Valhalla, New York. That's an area represented in Congress by first-term Republican Mike Lawler. But it's also an area that Joe Biden won in the 2020 presidential election. Mike Lawler was in attendance, and the president mentioned him.
Republican Congressman Mike Lawler's here as well. Mike's on the other team, but you know what? Mike is the kind of guy that when I was in the Congress, they were the kind of Republican I was used to dealing with. But he's not one of these MAGA Republicans, which I'm going to talk a little bit about. I don't want to get him in trouble by saying anything nice about him or negative about him, but thanks for coming, Mike. Thanks for being here. This is the way we used to do it all the time.
President Biden in New York, Congressman Mike Lawler tweeting on his joining the president at this event. I'm taking the opportunity to make the point to President Biden during his visit to my district today that we need to work together. The president, as vice president, negotiated with House Republicans previously, and that's what he should do again. In Washington, D.C., Congressman Chip Roy, Republican from Texas, getting questions from reporters as he left a meeting of House Republican members.
How did the conversations go in there about the debt limit? Do you mind stopping here?
Well, I've got to go. I got to go to a meeting that
Are
starts
Republicans
Senate
on the
Judiciary.
same page? Are you
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the president just needs to step up and deal with the debt limit. I mean, we passed a bill, and I mean, it's pretty straightforward for the American people to understand, and the president seems to be ignoring it.
Did they show any kind of polling in there, anything to back up the fact that Republicans, in your view, have the stronger hand here?
Well, I'm not going to talk about what we, did in a private meeting, but I mean, like I've looked at polling, and it's very clear, and American people are totally good with returning the regulatory state to pre-COVID levels. They're totally good with ending a student loan program that would pick winners and losers, leaving the plumber who didn't take a loan out on the street paying for someone else who did. People understand common sense. We need to return fiscal sanity, and that a so-called clean debt ceiling increase that's just going to borrow more money without changing the way this town works is dead on arrival. So the president has an obligation to work.
You're a policy guy. What does a framework for a potential deal even look like at this point?
The president actually come to the table instead of burying his head in the sand.
Would a cap deal paired with a debt ceiling increase, would that be enough? Do you need to have some of the permitting reform?
You guys need to go all the way down to the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue and go to the White House and say, what are you going to do, Mr. President? Because this House of Representatives has passed a bill. The President of the United States is sitting down there burying his head in the sand while this country burns. The border is wide open. Texas is under siege under Title 42. He refuses to do a damn thing about the border, and he's not doing a damn thing about the fiscal crisis because the president doesn't give a rat's rear end about the American people. So go down there and ask him why he won't do his job when we have done ours.
Congressman Chip Roy, Republican from Texas, with reporters after a closed-door meeting of House Republican members. The people that were in the White House Oval Office meeting on Tuesday said afterwards that staff members from the Big Four, the 2 Republican and 2 Democratic leaders of the House and Senate, would get together with the president's representatives and begin discussing the potential of a framework deal ahead of a default of the United States if no debt limit is raised or suspended by estimated early June, and that the principals would meet again on Friday. 2 of the people in that room on Tuesday speaking to reporters today, leading the Senate Republicans, Mitch McConnell from Kentucky, and the Senate Democrats, Chuck Schumer from New York. First, Senator Schumer.
Now, of course, we had a lot to discuss at the lunch today, but top of mind was, for everyone, was default. As everybody knows, yesterday I went to the White House with Leader McConnell, Leader Jeffries, Speaker McCarthy. And from that meeting, there was bad news and good news. The bad news: Speaker McCarthy was the only person in the room who refused to take default off the table. The one person standing in the way is Speaker McCarthy. He refused to take default off the table. President Biden said he would, Leader Jeffries said he would, I would, and Leader McConnell outside didn't say anything in the room, and outside he too said we must avoid default. But instead, Speaker McCarthy doubled down on his efforts, and rather than take default off the table, he's going to take it hostage at the hands of a far-right agenda that the American people would abhor. Avoiding default should not be contingent on passing the GOP's hard right partisan agenda, and the American people overwhelmingly agree.
Senator Chuck Schumer, the majority leader, Democrat from New York, with reporters today. At a separate news conference, the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, also talking about the meeting and the debt limit.
Just to follow up on yesterday's meeting down at the White House, I think it was a good time to remind everyone that 7 of the last 10 times we've raised the debt ceiling, it's had something attached to it, almost always related to spending, not surprisingly. So the notion that this is unheard of is nonsense. As you may recall, I've consistently said since February, the way this dilemma is dealt with is determined by the American people. They gave us divided government, just like they did in 2019, when I had to tell President Trump something he was not anxious to hear, which that he needed to reach an agreement with Nancy Pelosi on this issue. And you may recall he designated the Secretary of the Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, who negotiated a deal, and Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi, two bitter enemies, entered into a 2-year budget cap and an increase in the debt ceiling. This can be done, and it must be done. America is not going to default, and for whatever may have been said publicly after the meeting yesterday, the fact of the matter is, ultimately, an agreement will be reached between Joe Biden and Kevin McCarthy, and the country will not default.
Senator Mitch McConnell, the minority leader, Republican from Kentucky, today on Capitol Hill. Wall Street today, the Dow down 30, NASDAQ up 126, S&P up 18. Yahoo Finance says consumer prices in April showed inflation pressures remain elevated in the U.S. economy, while headline prices rose at the slowest annual rate since the period ending April 2021. According to the latest data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics released Wednesday morning, the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, revealed headline inflation rose 0.4% over last month and 4.9% over the prior year in April. Prices in March rose 0.1% on a monthly basis and 5% from the prior year. From the Jewish Chronicle, United States House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has intervened to block an event commemorating the catastrophe, in quotes, of Israel's founding in a Capitol Visitor Center in Washington, D.C. 9 groups known for opposing the Jewish state plan to gather on Wednesday for Nakba 75 and the Palestinian people, with Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, Democrat from Michigan, as a special guest. Palestinians and their supporters use the term Nakba, the Arabic word for catastrophe, to describe Israel's founding, and every year hold rallies. Speaker McCarthy telling the Washington Free Beacon it's wrong for members of Congress to traffic in anti-Semitic tropes about Israel. Speaker used his privilege to reserve rooms in the Capitol to reserve the room tonight to hold another celebration on U.S.-Israel relations at 75 years. Congressman Michael McCaul is the Foreign Affairs Committee chair, Republican from Texas, was asked by a reporter about this.
Speaker McCarthy scheduled a bipartisan briefing for later today in that same time slot, effectively blocking her from holding the event at that time. Any reaction to that, or the fact that Congresswoman Tlaib was holding that event there in the first place?
I think it's very inappropriate. That's not going to work. It's not going to work at all. That ain't working, man. Oh, man. Why don't you start that over? Look, I think Congressman Tlaib has a freedom of speech, First Amendment, but the speech, it's very anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian, and I think very inappropriate on the 75th anniversary of the state of Israel being formed. And so, this is what's happening to the Democratic Party. The far left is very anti-Israel. And Israel used to be a bipartisan issue. When I chair Foreign Affairs Committee, it's always been bipartisan. AIPAC has as well. And now we're seeing this wing in the Democratic Party just very anti-Israel, pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian, pro-terrorist. I find it very disturbing.
Congressman Michael McCaul, Republican from Texas, speaking with reporters this morning. Congresswoman Tlaib introduced a bill that calls on Congress to recognize, quote, the ongoing Nakba and Palestinian refugees' rights. Legislation co-sponsored by Democrats Betty McCollum, Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Jamal Bowman, and Cori Bush. The House Democratic Caucus chair, Pete Aguilar of California, asked about her not being able to hold the event.
Speaker McCarthy last night announced that he was canceling an event reservation for Representative Tlaib for a pro-Palestinian event. Is that something that you all as the Democratic leadership see as appropriate, or are you doing anything in response?
It's unfortunate. This place, the majority controls a lot of, meeting rooms, but people should be allowed to meet, to congregate, to have discussions, to express their viewpoints and ideas. That's who we are. But unfortunately, if the majority controls office space and they want to revoke a group or organization, sometimes they have that ability to do that. And we'll work with individuals within the caucus to make sure that they have an opportunity to be heard.
Congressman Pete Aguilar, Democrat from California, the caucus chair at a news conference. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter, word for word, to get the stories Washington is talking about emailed to you every day. Subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.